after the fight, they asked him, did Canelo ever hurt you? He's like, yeah, look at my arm. Like his arm was beat red. And throughout the fight, you would think like Canelo's arm shots aren't even doing anything to him.
Yeah.
And he was like, I knew that was coming because I watched the Callum Smith fight. And so like he did his homework. He did the extra credit. He got an A on the report. Like this man hit every single notch that he was supposed to, pre, during, and post fight. I mean, I just thought he was like on point. Welcome back to the RBR Recap, episode 16. I'm Alex Burgos, joined as always by my main man, Gabe Brevis, on an exciting Sunday evening after a big Canelo Bivol weekend. Got an upset victory for Dmitry Bivol, which we're ready to jump into. First, I got to ask you, Gabe, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, enjoying this Sunday evening, and happy Mother's Day to all the mamas out there.
Most definitely. All the moms. We wouldn't be here without you, obviously. And all the boxing moms, and we appreciate you. Happy Mother's Day. Let's jump right into what we got last night, Saturday, May 7th, Cinco de Mayo weekend, live on DAZN pay-per-view, the first of its kind. We got Canelo Alvarez versus Dmitry Bivol in a 12-round WBA light heavyweight championship bout. Bivol defending his title. You wouldn't have known it going into the fight because it was definitely the Canelo show. But this is what happens in sports. In boxing, you can't sleep on anyone. What ended up was supposed to be the first step of a multi-million-dollar run for Canelo with Matchroom, got derailed last night. So Bivol ended up winning on all three scorecards, a unanimous decision by scores of 115, 113 across the board. Gabe, I want to jump into that particular of the fight, the score. Was this fight as close as the judges had it?
I think you could see it as being a fight where it's 7 rounds to 5 or even 8-4, 7-5 being a 115 to a 113 score. I think that's fair, especially in some of the early rounds where I guess the big difference was how much emphasis or value do you place on Canelo throwing these big shots around the guard and to the body, to the head, versus Bivol, who would kind of throw these straight punches, perhaps not with all the force in the world, but definitely connecting and scoring points. I think there were a few rounds where you could have seen it either way based on what you want to emphasize. I don't think it's a total, and I don't think it's a terrible scorecard, 115 to 113. At the end of the day, the right man won, but I could also see 8-4. And, for some people, it might have been a kind of fight where it's 9-3 as well. There were some rounds where you could give Canelo some credit, but there's no doubt about it. Dmitry Bivol controlled and won the fight.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of people on Twitter that I was live tweeting. I was updating our live results page on the website. Normally I don't score fights, but I did last night just to have a basis to discuss if this thing was close, because I was anticipating, okay, maybe Bivol makes it close. And we're talking about, should he have gotten the nod? He ended up getting the decision, but there was guys like Shakur Stevenson on Twitter. Like there was 2, 3, or 4 rounds in this fight that were like, who won that round? And so looking back on my score, I was giving a lot of those to Canelo. I ended up scoring at 115, 113 for Bivol, just like the judges did. I had him winning the last 3 rounds, which gave him the fight, just like all of the judges did. But it's funny, after the fight, I wasn't like that was a 115, 113 fight. So it's odd. I mean, but I think it has to do with those swing rounds and who you gave those to. So like you said, I definitely think you could see an 8-4 fight for Bivol. Some were even saying a 9-3 fight. You could do that as well. What I don't believe is a fight where Canelo was saying after in the post-fight press conference that Bivol only won 4, maybe 5 rounds. So that way you're saying 7-5, 8-4 Canelo. The way that it went, I don't see that you could score the fight that way. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I don't see that either. Definitely 5-4 in Bivol's favor. But going back to your earlier point about scorecards, about how at the end you look back at your scores and you're like, did I see it as a 8-4 fight? Well, when judges are scoring fights and then when we're scoring them, we're doing it round by round and we try to encapsulate all the action and the emotions within that round. But as 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pass by, you're seeing how dominant he is. You're like, oh, wow, this is he's cruising to a decision. This is a landslide victory. But then when you look back and see how you judge things when encapsulated within those rounds, you see, all right, maybe there were some swing rounds. So there is a difference between looking back and saying, damn, he dominated, and when compared to actually scoring them within the action, within the rounds.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a sport that is judged and scored round by round, hence the name, round by round boxing.
That's your soundbite, my friend.
Yeah, man. So it's super important. And when you look at it like that, yeah, you can go back and be like, okay, well, boxing not always is a sport that you can look at like what was the overall story, because there's different mini chapters that go on in this large story. So yes, the right man won. I agree with you, but there were different, back and forth rounds. There were different things that happened. I think towards the end and the championship rounds, the optics of it, Canelo was gassed. It looked, downright exhausted. And so that's that last memory, that lasting impression that you have 10, 11, 12, where Bivol is just, clearly winning those rounds. And then you're like, yeah, he did that for most of the fight. And then if you have, I know we go back and forth on CompuBox and stuff, but it's all that I have to go on. But they mentioned towards the end of the fight, Bivol had landed double digits in every round and Canelo hadn't. I think it was like in the 7th or 8th or something like that. So when you start to hear those things as well, and the stats are really backing up what you feel like you're seeing, then you get an understanding of like why this fight is, or why boxing is judged round by round, because there's just chapters within a larger story. And so yes, maybe some people thought at the end like, oh, Bivol dominated that, but there were things in each round that could have swayed some judges in 2, 3, or 4 of those rounds. So it's really difficult to score some of those. But again, like we said, we feel the right man won at the end of the day. Also, we have to take a look at, one important factor in this fight, which was Bivol's activity and the success that he had against Canelo, how these two fighters came out. Gabe, what are your thoughts on Bivol's game plan, and why do you feel he was so successful in this fight?
I think before we discuss his game plan, we got to set aside real quickly the size advantage that Dmitry Bivol has. Remember, Canelo started, or at least he won his first world title at super welterweight, 154. Even ahead of the Rocky Fielding fight in 168, they asked him, do you see yourself going to light heavyweight? And in 2018, he thought, oh, no, I don't think I can do that. It's too big. But obviously, the success he had against Kovalev, Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, and others gave him enough confidence to actually fight a top elite 175 pounder in his prime. Aside from the distinct size advantage, because that's a big factor that affects the game plan and why Dmitry Bivol won, I think what Bivol did correctly was to keep using his jab, keep varying the jab, keeping guessing, not letting him know when the right hand was going to come, and feinting a lot, and using really his boxing skills. I think one concern that we brought up prior was that he dropped his hands consistently during or after combinations. But Dmitry Bivol was really good at maintaining a high guard and also using his footwork. And it wasn't just the simple kind of footwork of moving around the gym. It was a kind of footwork of inches, throwing some punches. When he felt that Canelo would come back, taking a few inches to step back or step around, and then being right there to continue jabbing and throwing straight shots. So I think that was one. Those are two things that were really successful on the part of Dmitry Bivol, using long shots, using the jabs, and of course the footwork that kept Canelo guessing, and then also the high guard defense. Every time Canelo wanted to come back with a counter punch, Dmitry Bivol had the earmuffs on, waiting for Canelo's shots, and it didn't really seem like Canelo was doing anything. And also, I mean, we can talk more about this, the psychological aspect. I think one thing that's really important that Dmitry Bivol had is that he wasn't intimidated by the spotlight and by having so many fans against him. The psychological aspect was really good. And the biggest testament of that was when Canelo was on the ropes and he wanted Dmitry to kind of engage with him and say, hey, come here, throw some more shots. Obviously with the intent to get him to commit and maybe counter. And Dmitry Bivol said, no, I'm not going to do it. And he took a step back and kept landing those straight shots. And he said, I'm not going to be here for your counters.
We mentioned a couple of the things that he needed to do on the pre-cap, and I thought that he actually did do very well. One thing was stick to the basics. I thought he was the best version of himself. He went in not looking to score a knockout. He went in working effectively behind his jab and was better defensively and more responsible than we had ever seen him before. And I think he spoke to that after. He's like, these last couple fights that I fought didn't really do it for me. I was just defending my title, but he was like feeling and hearing the roar of the crowd against me, knowing that I was facing someone the caliber of Canelo. It just upped his game that much more. And he really brought the best version of himself to the table. And we saw what he could do. I was super impressed with his poise in the ring. After the fight, they asked him, did Canelo ever hurt you? And he's like, yeah, look at my arm. Like his arm was beat red. And throughout the fight, you would think like Canelo's arm shots aren't even doing anything to him.
Yeah.
But the first thing he said was like, yeah, he was like, that did hurt. And he was like, I knew that was coming because I watched the Callum Smith fight. And so like he did his homework. He did the extra credit. He got an A on the report. Like this man hit every single notch that he was supposed to, pre, during, and post fight. I mean, I just thought he was like on point, answering all the questions as well. Another point I want to make too is just props to him when they asked him, you beat Canelo. He was number one. Now do you feel like you're the pound for pound king? He's like, no, I beat Canelo on the night. I was the better guy tonight, but I'm not ready to call myself the pound for pound king. I mean, like, can you get a better answer from a guy that just scored like one of the biggest upsets? And I know people are like, oh, why are you calling it one of the biggest upsets? Like we knew he could beat. Look, going into this fight, we knew that potentially Bivol could win. But with all of the things surrounding Cinco de Mayo weekend, don't bet against the house, got to knock him out to score a draw. I mean, we knew the deck was stacked in a sense against Bivol. But the judges got it right. He performed masterfully. He was able to perform at the level that he was supposed to, even with everything against him. And I just thought like it all fell in place. Couldn't happen to a better guy.
I think you're right about his having a poker face. He didn't get intimidated by the spotlight. And then also when he had some adversity with Canelo, feeling those shots on his arm, he had a serious poker face. He never showed that he was hurt at all. He never showed that Canelo was doing any sort of damage to him, but even though he admitted it in the post-fight interview. So absolutely showing a lot of poise and a lot of composure and having a poker face. And I like what you said about him having sticking to the basics. This wasn't an extravagant display of technique and all this. This was just doing the fundamentals extremely well over and over again and making sure and scoring points and getting a win. This wasn't flashy. This wasn't a demonstration of ultimate talent and speed. This was, let me show you how to box. Let me show you how to win a fight with the jab and the 1-2 and good footwork and solid defense.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times fighters end up trying to add new wrinkles and really change up the style that brought them to the dance, brought them to the big show. Dmitry Bivol just upped and refined what got him to the show, what got him to the title fights, what got him to have so many defenses, what got him to headline. I thought it was the HBO Bivol back to like the, saying that he was going back to like the headlining and then just that much better. Like he was just a very well-oiled machine and the best version of himself, which I love because like we said in the precap, he had to go in believing that what got him there and doing that at a high level was going to be enough to win. And at the end of the day, even if the judges didn't give him the scores, didn't give him the victory on the scorecards, I think we could all look at it and say, he definitely won this fight. And he was saying that's going to be enough for me. Now, luckily, we're not talking about, quote unquote, a robbery or anything like that. The right guy won. So kudos to him. And, now there's a lot to look forward to, whether it's a rematch with Canelo or even potentially facing the winner of the recently officially announced light heavyweight unification fight between Artur Beterbiev and Joe Smith.
Right. And interesting that you mentioned that he did what got him to the show and the biggest fight of his career. You could perhaps say that maybe Canelo didn't do that on his end. This wasn't the Canelo who boxed Triple G in their second fight. I don't think this was a Canelo who outboxed Daniel Jacobs, who has a similar height and reach advantage as Dmitry Bivol had against Canelo. Obviously, it's a much bigger opponent, different guy, but from the very beginning, I mean, these are some of the things that Canelo did wrong, I think, in this fight, is that he was coming in there landing wide or throwing and landing wide, hard shots from the very beginning. When have you ever seen a fighter from a smaller division going up to a bigger division and trying to bank on hard shots and trying to intimidate with big, hard, wide shots? It's usually the reverse. It's the smaller guy saying, you know what? Let me invest in scoring some points. I'm thinking Roy Jones Jr. in his heavyweight battle. He wasn't trying to knock out his opponent, or even Oscar De La Hoya when he fought Bernard Hopkins, or every single time Floyd Mayweather fought at 147 and 154, which really wasn't his weight class, right? You never see a smaller guy going into a bigger division and saying, all right, I'm going to go through and score some rounds by landing some hard power shots. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a mistake from Canelo's. And I think he should have focused more on boxing like he did against Danny Jacobs. Score some points, invest in the body too. I don't know if we saw enough investment into the body in the early rounds. And one thing that I think Dmitry Bivol was really good at is keeping him guessing with the jab. That was one of the keys to victory that we talked about in the pre-cap. And in order to do that, in order to prevent Canelo from finding his timing and being able to land counter shots, you got to keep him guessing with the jab. Another thing I forgot to keep in mind was that aside from having a really intelligent jab and timing and feints and all that, like they said on the broadcast, Dmitry Bivol has a shotgun jab. Mm-hmm. So not only is the timing and the skill difficult, you're worried about getting hit with that jab because it's so hard, and the length and the size. So that really prevented Canelo from landing counter shots against a larger opponent in Dmitry Bivol.
Transitioning into what Canelo did and didn't do, I was pretty surprised at his inability to switch game plans and to really think on the fly. I thought Chris Mannix, in different words, kind of mentioned that after the fight and was asking Canelo, you're one of the smartest fighters. Why is it that you weren't able to kind of adapt and, get into plan B and C? And he was just like, well, you got to give him credit. But to your point, coming out winging huge hooks and power shots in round one, it's not a good idea. I thought that it looked like the later round Canelo in the fight against Caleb Plant, early on against Bivol. And it was kind of like mind-boggling. I'm scratching my head like, why isn't he changing levels? He's one of the best, level changers in the game, shooting the jab down low, coming up top. He never set the stage for that stuff to work later on in the fight. He was just winging shots up top, expecting, I guess, Bivol to break down after he hit him with a bunch of shots on the arm. Now, that could have been one part of it. But even Bivol spoke to that. He said, I think one of his, paraphrasing, one of his mistakes was that he just invested in all power shots and then fatigued at the end. And it's just all of us, or maybe even Bivol was kind of scratching his head like, this isn't really the guy that I was expecting. Maybe partially that game plan, but not fully. I didn't think that he was ever able to get into a comfortable groove like we've seen him. You mentioned the Jacobs fight where he's working that upper body movement, and Jacobs it's a popular highlight that DAZN always puts out. Jacobs is throwing like 5-6 jabs in a row, trying to hit something, and Canelo's just moving all over the place. Bivol would throw that shotgun jab and Canelo would start moving. And it's like, wait a minute, 2, 3, 4 landing. And then he would have to reset. Like he never got into that groove where he was super comfortable just moving in and out and in spaces. And a lot of the times when he found himself against the ropes, he was getting hit.
And part of that, of course, is the size advantage that Dmitry Bivol has. It's hard to really implement an intelligent game plan when the guy is just so much bigger than you. But, and again, all of our respect goes to Canelo. We're not saying that he's a terrible fighter. I mean, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people who, with one performance, they just completely changed their opinion of him. I think he's still a pound for pound king. It says a lot about him that the pound for pound king moves up a division to fight perhaps a number 2 guy and goes the distance with him. I mean, that's really the proper perspective in an era where we're having trouble people unifying titles within their own division. The undisputed champion moves up a weight class and faces one of the world champions, right? So it says a lot about Canelo, but that because of that, we have such a high expectation of him. That's why we're saying what we're saying. We expected him to use some of that boxing skills to counterattack some of the size advantages that Dmitry Bivol had, and he simply didn't do that. You know what I mean? We wanted to see him. We wanted to see how his superior boxing skills would do against such a size advantage. And like you said, winging those power shots is not what we expect. And you kind of ask yourself, did the performances against Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, and Caleb Plant get him a little bit too comfortable with scoring knockouts and power shots? Right?
Yeah,
When he
I
fought,
agree.
when he fought Triple G, he fought Rocky Fielding, and then he fought Canelo, Danny Jacobs. When he went to the Danny Jacobs fight, who is a natural 160 pounder, now at 168, I don't think he thought to himself, yeah, I could probably score a knockout. All right. And that's a smaller fighter than Callum Smith and Dmitry Bivol and Sergey Kovalev. You know what I mean? So maybe scoring knockouts against bigger fighters perhaps made him feel like he could do that against Dmitry Bivol. But I think the mindset he should have had was, this is going to be a similar guy like Danny Jacobs, where I shouldn't expect to knock him out, but I should try to score some points.
And that's what we got to look at going into a potential rematch, which Eddie Hearn said he thinks he'll enact. Canelo said, I got to look at the tape. I got to talk to my team, see what's next. It may seem, a day after the fight that maybe it's a better idea to go back down. But again, you're talking about one of the great competitors in the sport. He spoke to his attitude and his will to win and his, aggressive nature and wanting to that get back. And he's like, this doesn't end here. You know what I mean? So assuming that he does take that rematch, I definitely think they've got to lose the idea that they're just going to come in, wing power shots, whether you want to blame it on the vegan diet. I do want to throw that out there. I don't know how that affected his body, but man, he looked like where he was just gassed, towards the end of the fight. Couldn't fight those full 3 minutes. And maybe it's, getting used to, like you were saying, some of those victories he had in the past. A bit of like, I know this is going to work. But now that he's gone the full 12 rounds with Bivol, I think he has to know, like you said, again, this is, going to be a full-time job. I'm not getting off early today. I got to go, I got to go through my 8 hours of work and make sure I do everything, set myself up for success later in the fight. And that's what I thought he didn't do, going back to like working the jab, changing levels, going up and down, and just really looking to work the body more. And we've seen him fight different types of fights. We've seen him in the second Triple G fight, that style, the Danny Jacobs fight. The way that he looked for me is probably one of his best performances. That's more of what I was expecting for him to do in this fight. I mean, assuming he does take the rematch, how would you size that fight up? I mean, seeing what we saw and knowing what we know now, do you think Canelo can defeat Dmitry Bivol?
I don't know, because there's such a size advantage on behalf of Dmitry Bivol that maybe this is a fight that he can't win. And maybe he should be better off at 168 pounds, because the transition from 154 to 175 for me has been rather quick. He only did like officially 2 fights at 160, which were or 3, right? The other ones were catch weights in betweens, like Cotto at 155 or Chavez at 164 or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. But officially as a champion or defending champion or fighting for the title, it was just Triple G 2 times and then Jacobs. Then he moves up to fight Rocky Fielding, goes up to fight goes up to fight Sergey Kovalev. The pandemic starts, and then now he's a 168 pounder. But I felt like he really never enjoyed his time at 160, whereas at 154, his dude was there for like a fucking decade. You know what I mean? He was there for forever. So it was a quick move from 154 to 160 and then 168, and then an even quicker move to 175. What I'm trying to say by all this is that perhaps he's better off at 168, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's still 2 divisions above his original weight class in which he won a world title. So I think that he's better off staying at 168, defending his undisputed title. If he wants to do a Dmitry Bivol rematch, do it in a fight or 2. See how he does against Beterbiev, and maybe you fight undisputed champion at 175 versus undisputed at 168. But sometimes when you take that rematch right away, aside from the physical damage and the wear and tear, there's also a psychological damage that might really affect him if he takes that Dmitry Bivol fight too close. And again, Canelo Alvarez is such a great fighter that perhaps I mean, I said that I don't know if he can beat him. Maybe he can beat him. Maybe he is that a great fighter, but not the Canelo Alvarez that we saw last night, for sure.
Briefly, also, I want to touch on what your thoughts are on the champ, Dmitry Bivol. If he faces either one of those guys, let's assume it's Artur Beterbiev, a guy that he hasn't fought because we know that he can defeat Joe Smith. Focused, zoned in for this undisputed matchup against Artur Beterbiev. Let's assume, how do you think that fight goes, and who would be favored?
Right. An idea that I think emerged during this conversation with you, but also I think during the broadcast, I can't remember who said it, was that perhaps Dmitry Bivol fights to his opposition. Maybe because the opposition hasn't been that great. He's been cruising to a decision and he hasn't looked spectacular. But against the best pound for pound fighter in the world, he delivered an excellent, intelligent performance. And if that's the case, if this is the guy who fights to his opposition, then we're going to see the best Dmitry Bivol ever against Artur Beterbiev. Why? Because the dude's dangerous. He hits really hard. And he's the unified light heavyweight champion of the world. And he's one person away from becoming undisputed champion at that division. So I think Dmitry Bivol would do really well in the fight against Beterbiev. It's going to be a contrast to styles because Beterbiev, you get the feeling that he's more comfortable fighting at a closer distance. He's really good at landing close, short shots. Whereas Bivol, we know what he's going to want to do in that fight. He's going to want to box him. I would say that Beterbiev is the favorite because of what we've been able to see of him recently. But with that performance from Dmitry Bivol last night, I know it was against a small fighter, but you got to put some respect on his name and recognize him as a top talent at 175 pounds. And if that Beterbiev can't get made in the immediate future, there's another man who's been calling him out, and that's
Zurdo
Ramirez. And, Zurdo's a great fighter, but I don't think anyone's going to have him as a favorite against Dmitry Bivol. I think that the length, the size, the boxing skills is going to be too much for Zurdo, but I do want to see that fight.
You took the words out of my mouth. I mean, I want to see Beterbiev and Bivol for sure. And even after last night, I mean, I thought at one point, maybe because he was like this fringe, he was always saying, well, I can go to 168 if I need to. And, he seemed like a leaner, smaller 175, but I think he carries that weight well. I mean, he looks like he could be physically big enough to withstand Beterbiev. Now, obviously, Beterbiev has ridiculous power, and even at the advanced age that he's at, would pose a serious threat to Bivol. So that would be an excellent fight if that does happen. But man, that would be a fun fight between Bivol and Ramirez. And I definitely would sign up for that one if we don't get a unified, undisputed fight after the Smith and Beterbiev fight. So Zurdo Ramirez has been calling anyone and everyone. I mean, Canelo, Bivol, he's just going through the motions, staying busy, and just really looking to position himself to get that opportunity, similar to a guy in David Benavidez. He's calling everyone out, and he's just going through the fights that are going to get him in the position. So sooner or later, for either one of those guys, you hope that the next one is like this really challenging fight, a championship fight. For Zurdo, it's going to be really tough. He's got to close up some of those defensive gaps. But like I said, it'll be a fun fight while it lasts. So if we can't get unified and undisputed at 175, give me Bivol and Zurdo.
Thank you for listening to the RBR Recap. Make sure to follow us on social media at RBR Recap and visit RBRRecap.com for the latest episodes.